Welcome to Previously on X-Men.
The podcast that looks back on X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. You can find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Other shows on the network include Three Nice Things, where we force ourselves to say three nice things about a movie with a bad and often earned reputation. There's Is It Classic, Does It Rock, where we pick a band or artist and go through the discography album by album, track by track. Radio 64, Video Game Music Remix Radio. And 9021, Here We Go, a 90210 rewatch podcast. Though, due to Three Nice Things, I think they lost a co-host to madness.
I think so, yeah. I was going to say, you ruined him.
Yeah, Nick
probably
on that
for life.
Nick from the 902 podcast came over to Three Nice Things to talk about Island of Dr. Moreau with Brando and Val Kilmer. And he did not leave a happy person. It
destroyed him. I don't know why you keep picking these, deeply disturbing movies.
I had to watch
force
Son
him
of
to
Mask,
watch.
too.
Did it hit you as deeply as it hit him?
It makes me angry, but I put it behind me.
Okay, yeah. That's very big of you.
Thank you. Share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes by following us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. And please rate, subscribe, and share this show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Eric Mickles, known online as Dust vs. Tweak. And with me is my co-host...
Hilary Gunning.
Hilary Gunning. I pointed at
Hey, we did it.
We did it. Today, we are interviewing. Today is one of the things where we do and more of our title.
This is an and more, yeah.
Yes. It's not comics. It's a little movies.
Yeah, it is a lot of movies, I would say.
And more. We have an interview with one David Hayter.
The very same.
Screenwriter for X-Men and X2, X-Men United.
Yeah, we get to have a nice conversation with him. He talks a lot about how he got into that, which is my favorite part of the story, I think.
The part where he just kind of where the studio's wait, who's working for us?
Yep. But you'll hear all about that in a minute.
Yeah, Fox just gets memos and that's an extra person. You know what? I did see X-Men 1 first, and then I played Metal Gear. And then I played Metal Gear Solid.
You got to get the order right.
As a teenager. Well, I'm just saying,
the
some
listeners
people
deserve to know.
will know him as the voice of Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid. But yeah, it's great because David Hayter, as you'll find out, he's a fan of the X-Men, and he wanted to bring his comic book fandom into the movie, and we dared to ask questions regarding the third X-Men movie even.
We dared.
Yeah, and he was kind enough to answer them. I'm sure after a while you're like, yep, X-Men 3.
But it's a great interview. He was really open about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's play the interview with Mr. David Hayter. We're here with David Hayter, who, for the purpose of this podcast, we're talking to him about the screenplays he wrote for the first two X-Men movies, X-Men and X2, X-Men United. And we just got a whole bunch of questions to ask because the first movie was a pretty big event for both of us.
Yeah, we're pretty excited to talk to you. Let me get straight off the bat with questions. So something we've commented on before in this podcast is how succinctly the first X-Men movie handles exposition. And I know you're a fan of the comics, which probably helped, but you also know all of the crazy stuff that happens in the X-Men comics, and they were 40 years old at the time. So knowing all of that complexity, how did you go about boiling all that down to the story you wanted to convey?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for listening, anybody who's listening. Let's see. We did boil it down succinctly in the end. Our first cut was 2 hours and 5 minutes long. Which we used to call Woody Allen's X-Men because it was full of exposition and not enough action to support it, and it eventually got cut way back to 90 some odd minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have loved that.
Well, I think there's deleted scenes and there's a few good things on the DVD, but overall they were right to cut it back. It wasn't really a matter of trying to hone down the story I wanted to tell. It was honing down the story that Brian, the director, wanted to tell. Mm-hmm. And really the goal, because nobody, including the studio and most of the filmmakers, nobody thought that this was going to work.
Right.
Nobody anticipated that a superhero movie that wasn't Batman or Superman could work. And ours was full of weird stuff, mutants, and they've all got powers and names and all this stuff. So basically, it was Brian's goal to just sort of present the world, introduce the world to the X-Men, and tell a very basic story along the way, so you get an idea of what they do and why they do it. Mm-hmm. But really, the first movie is an excuse to say, here's why they have different code names. Here's why they
Right.
here's why they wear certain outfits. Here's why they have different powers. It was really to just sort of give a lesson. Like there's a real difference, as you know, between the first two movies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because when we started on X-Men 2, I said to Brian, do we have to do all that setup again? And he said, no. We assume everybody's seen the first movie and we hit the ground running. And as soon as he said that, I wrote the opening Nightcrawler attack, Whiteout.
Yeah, that must have felt really freeing.
Yeah, it was. It was. I was able to sort of, for the first time, start telling the story the way I wanted to tell it.
Right.
But on the first film, I was one of the few people. There was me, Tom DeSanto, Kevin Feige. We were the three guys who knew the X-Men comic books.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so my job was essentially to deliver Brian the moments that he wanted and to keep it true to X-Men, which to me meant the Chris Claremont run of X-Men in the 80s, which is what I grew up on.
Right, sure. How much a part of the character choice is the picking the roster of the X-Men, the ones that are going to be in this movie in certain roles, whether it's the Brotherhood or the X-Men? How much of a part of that were you in, and how did they all just go about picking? Because after 40 years, the X-Men had a pretty robust cast.
They did, and they do. Well, it's kind of a disappointing answer, but they were all chosen before I came on board.
Okay.
I had started. Ed Solomon was the first credited screenwriter that worked on it, and then my friend Chris McQuarrie came in and did a pass before I started working on it. And then I worked for 13 months and did hundreds of drafts and was lucky enough to get sole credit on the movie. But I did not. I think Ed basically laid out the basic story the way that it went, and I think he and Brian probably chose the characters they were going to use,
right.
And then so everybody was in place. The only difference before the movie came out was that we had Beast in the film, but he was too expensive to film doing any action.
Right.
So he always got his leg broken before the third act.
Sure.
And we were like, that's stupid. That's lame. So we eventually cut him because it opened up our effects budget in a huge way. So Beast got cut. I can't remember if we considered anybody else. Maybe we talked about. Well, we certainly talked about other X-Men for X2, but for X-Men, it was already in place.
Right.
Okay.
When scripting a movie like X-Men, especially at the time where big budget movies are still so much cheaper than they are now, even, do you have to take budget and the effects cost into account when writing, or do you just write the screenplay and then you start chopping once they deliver the budget?
No, it's a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
First of all, it was a $75 million budget that we were given, which was a lot of money in 1999, but it was, they were already making $100 million movies. It wasn't, it wasn't like the breaking the bank sort of thing. And we delivered our first budget at $82 million, and I was like, oh, they're going to be thrilled. But they were not thrilled. They were like, what don't you understand about $75 million? You will not get a penny more.
Oh, boy.
And so, we had to make cuts for budget. And then I continued doing revisions and rewrites at Brian's request every day throughout shooting. Like, we were changing things all the time. And so I wrote a scene where Rogue was walking across the mansion grounds, and she makes eye contact with this beautiful young man who sees her looking at him, and he makes a drive towards the basket, and he leaps up, and these wings come out and shred the back of his shirt, and he dunks the ball, and he comes down, and his wings sort of come down beautifully, and he gives her a wink, and it's this very cool mutant meet cute, essentially.
Right.
And I handed it in, and 20 minutes later, Mike Fink, our visual effects producer, showed up at my office door, and he threw the scene back down on my desk, and he said, $400,000.
Oh, my word.
So it became, there's a moment in the film where you see a kid. We had this kid who was triplets, and there were three of them. So Brian took the basketball, put these three kids out on the thing. He said, "Hey, you throw your ball to your brother. You throw the ball to your brother, and you throw it at the basket. Doesn't matter."
Teleporting kid.
And the teleporting kid, and that cost us about 25 cents, and sort of erasing him. But that's what happened to my $400,000 scene.
Shot. Yeah,
that's a nice, clever, simple way to solve that.
Yeah. Well, it was affordable. It wasn't as cool or as character driven as what I had, but
it is slightly less cool.
Yeah, but it's an example of what you're facing when you're dealing with a budget. And people think $75 million, that's all the money in the world.
Right.
But it's not when you have 11 superpowered main
right.
Yeah, really.
And how much I know the movie got pushed up. It was supposed to be a winter release, and then it was pushed to the July, and so I know the movie had to be done quicker. How much rewriting happens because of that?
I don't think I ever knew that.
So
we were doing so much rewriting every day that it wouldn't have affected me any. If they, it wasn't like we were. I never recall any like moving up of the schedule. It's entirely possible that that's true. I guess it was pretty quick. I mean, we finished shooting in February and the movie came out in May, so it was pretty fast. But I would imagine a lot of that impacted post more than it impacted me.
Okay, well, something I'm really interested in your story about this is that you came into the project after it had already started and sort of slipped sideways into writing the script after pitching something to Singer. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, in 1997, I produced and starred in a little movie called Burn that Bryan Singer had owned at one point, and he put his name on it, helped me make the movie. And we never made a deal for that film, so then I was a broke, depressed filmmaker. And Bryan gave me a job answering the phones on X-Men. And he kept complaining about the script. The script's terrible, and nobody knows what the X-Men are, and I'm just in despair. My career's over. And basically what happened was he was trying to figure out a way to get the word X-Men to be said in the movie without it sounding stupid, right? Without it sounding too grand, like we are the X-Men or blah, blah, blah. So I knew the characters, and I was driving them to a Creature Effects meeting, and I said, well, look, why don't you have a scene where Wolverine is walking across the mansion grounds, and he runs into Cyclops, and they get into like a little pickup basketball game or something, and they're tossing the ball back and forth while Cyclops is telling him he should take a stand, he should join the team. And Wolverine is having none of it, and then he looks around, he sees all these X's, this Xavier ego trip around the mansion, and he's like, you know what? Why don't you and Xavier and all your little X-Men go to hell? And then he pops the ball with his claw, right?
Yeah, that follows.
Walks away. And Bryan said, I was like, then you have your lead character do it. You have your badass Wolverine say it, but he's saying it as an insult, so it sort of takes the sting off it. It's not so grand. It's not so whatever. It's I think that'll work for you. Right. And Bryan said, yeah, go write that for me. And I figured he was kidding. I wasn't angling to write the script. He called me the next day and said, where's my scene? I'm like, oh, I'm writing it, which I wasn't. And then I spent a day writing it, and then he put it in the movie. Didn't end up in the final movie, but after that, he started just making me, the end of the day, he'd say, okay, you stay in the office and just write till 1 or 2 in the morning and get me new pages on this and on this and on this. And eventually, after a month and a half of that, the studio found out, and they were legally forced to make a deal with me. So they paid me $35,000. That's the Guild minimum rewrite fee, and I became the on-set writer.
Very cool. Yeah, I love that's what you pitched to him, because one of the strengths of the movie really seems to be Wolverine being used as that lens for the everyman. The everyman in the audience who would kind of think it's dumb.
Yeah, and well, I read a cool analysis of the Star Wars prequel movies that said one of the reasons that those movies don't work is because you don't have a Han Solo.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's all Obi-Wans. It's all people like talking about the Jedi and this, there's a Jedi and this, and you need a guy who's like, come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is ridiculous. And as long as somebody acknowledges that it's ridiculous, the audience goes, okay, somebody pointed it out, and I can go with it.
Right. Lets you off the hook.
Yeah, and so Wolverine is the perfect, you know, especially his journey. He doesn't really care. He's not involved in mutant issues. He's involved in survival and keeping himself out of trouble. You know, that's his goal. And it just provides the perfect sort of like guy to say, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Right. This is more of a personal curiosity for me, because the first Blade movie came out like 2 years before X-Men 1, and there's a lot of similarities between them in terms of them trying to introduce this kind of like crazy underground world with people with powers that nobody else knows about, but also doing it in the real world, kind of doing it like a bit grittier than, you know, it had been in the previous years, like with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin and those types of movies. I'm just wondering if at the time, if the first Blade movie and its success was in anybody's mind while making the first X-Men movie.
Oh yeah, I think Blade's success allowed us to get greenlit. It had a huge impact on Marvel, which at the time was being run by Avi Arad, and so Avi produced this movie, and it made, I think, 90 million domestic, and it was about a black vampire killer superhero. You know, and it made $90 million on probably a, you know, $25-30 million budget. I don't know for sure, but so yeah, I think that, I mean, it didn't really affect me and Brian. Creatively, I don't think. I mean, I can't really speak for Brian, but I wasn't like, they didn't tell me, oh, you have to watch Blade. Do this, but I had seen the film and I really liked it, and but I was already, I mean, I was a comic book fan. I was like, the world is waiting for these movies and they don't even know it. So I was already on board, and I had already been taught by Chris Claremont how to introduce the world to the X-Men. So no, creatively for me, it didn't really play in, but certainly in terms of the politics of getting the money behind it, it played a huge role. It was hugely important to us.
Right. So the first X-Men movie does a lot of foreshadowing for not just X-Men 2, but future films. We've got a lot to tell you, and these are the characters, these are what they do, these are their code names. Well, how do you balance writing a film by itself, like a standalone film like X-Men 1, while you're also writing along and hoping for a sequel, and you're planting those threads that you hope the movie will be successful, and then you'll be able to fulfill those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. I don't think anybody, but maybe me, were thinking about the next movie. Like, in fact, Brian specifically told me, do not think about the next movie. There is only one movie in front of us, and we have to get through that. And that's it. But I did beg him to put in, there's a moment after the machine, Magneto's machine, is irradiating people, and we've said it appears to not affect mutants. But I begged him to put in this shot, as soon as the light dies away, cut to Jean, like realizing that something has happened to her. And should we be lucky enough to go on, we can say that this was the beginning of the Dark Phoenix transformation and what have you. I think any other, and I'd be curious to hear what you read into it in terms of the future, but I think anything else you read into it that layers into future stories is just naturally built into the interactions of the characters, the love triangles, and the, there's just, those were real living characters to me, and so we knew we weren't going to solve Wolverine's amnesia, for example, in the first film, but it's such a compelling part of who he is that it literally allows you to introduce him as the man with no name. You know, I mean, he doesn't have any past. Even he doesn't know his past. So that's kind of fun. And then in the end, it's a big question that's been left hanging. So you can say, okay, so I've got a clue for you. Go on. And I guess at that point we're hoping that there might be a sequel. But I think if it was a standalone movie, you'd be like, okay, now Wolverine's done right by the X-Men. He's going to go on and take his own journey now for a bit. So yeah, there were things I would love that I did want to set up for future films, but we really were under a mandate that no, there will be one film. We'll see if it works. Yeah. And if it does, you get to survive,
Right. When X2 is greenlit then, and you're brought on to write as well, did you have things already in place that you wanted to take it, or did you kind of change direction? Like when you were writing X-Men 1, did you have some ideas, and then X-Men 2 came along, you're like, oh, we're going in a completely different direction, or there were things that you were out to get in the movie?
I think that we knew we were going to send Wolverine to Alkali Lake to seek out his past. We knew the core of the movie was going to be who is Wolverine, what was his past, and we knew. But those were the things before it got greenlit, and I knew that I wanted to layer in Jean's power expanding and starting to go wrong. I think those were the only things we knew. Then they greenlit it, and it was like, okay, now we have to actually write the movie.
Right.
And I said, why don't we base it on God Loves, Man Kills, which is a great graphic novel from the X-Men world. And we changed the preacher William Stryker to the guy who created Wolverine, William Stryker, the military guy. And we kept the climax of that book where they use Xavier in Cerebro to kill all the mutants in the world. That was from that book.
Right.
And then also they upped our budget to $125 million. So suddenly we were like, oh, we could do Beast. And then I don't know where Nightcrawler came from. I think Bryan Singer said, no, we should do Nightcrawler. And so that sort of thing came together. So it was just sort of anything you can glean from the end of the first X-Men was what we probably had in mind.
Okay.
Going into it. But then when you actually have to build it out, it's a lot of stuff needs to be thought of.
Right.
Yeah. You mentioned Stryker, and I'd love to talk to you about that because I thought it was really interesting, the decision to change him from a religious zealot to this sort of military zealot. I'm not sure who made that decision, but I'd love to know more about why that happened and how you translate that same kind of crazy zealotry into such a different area.
Well, I think it was Bryan Singer who said, if it's going to be a story about Wolverine's past, then the lead villain has to be the guy that turned him into Wolverine, that infused his bones with the metal and tortured him and lost his memory and so on and so forth. We're exhuming his memory. So it made more sense than to have an additional religious zealot who was doing this and that. Now, a religious zealot, you kind of get why they don't like mutants. They're like, oh, you're from hell and all that unreasonableness.
Sure.
But woven in to William Stryker, the religious zealot's story in God Loves, Man Kills, is a moment where he's like working around the atomic testing or something, and his wife has a baby in the desert, and it's born, and it's clearly a mutant.
Right.
Like this, you never see it, but it's some sort of monster. And so he murders the baby in the desert, and I think he murders his wife. It's a pretty twisted character.
Thanks. Yeah. Yep.
So I said, okay, well, look, why don't we do that? Why don't we give him a child who was a terrifying mutant that really ruined his life and lost him his wife, so that he is motivated by just a sheer hatred of this group, this genetic group.
Right.
And you'll get the same effect. It's still bigotry. It's still blind hatred. But it's driven by a very personal thing. So that's how we bridged it. I found that scene again with Stryker killing his baby in the desert, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's a story I can. And then I wrote the speech about his wife couldn't get the images out of her mind, and so she took a power drill to her temple and tried to pour them out, which I'm amazed they let that go because it's so gruesome.
Oh, but it's a great moment.
it's a great moment, and you're like, oh, I bet you that guy's upset.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you need it to really understand what he's doing.
Yeah, and it's like she did this surgery on herself, and so he's like, I'll do surgery on any mutants. I'll do whatever I need to conquer this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's how it came together.
You talked about how you're a big fan, especially of Claremont's run of the X-Men, so you kind of have an idea of how maybe the X-Men talk or in the comics are supposed to talk. But now you're making the second movie, and you've seen the first movie with the actors playing the roles. Does that change how you now write those characters, how you're writing the X-Men, knowing how Ian McKellen plays the character or how Hugh Jackman is playing Wolverine? Or are you still very much like, we got to get this this comic book style in there?
These are really good questions. I mean, I've been asked a few of them, but these are really original and cool. So well done. Everyone should listen to this podcast.
Thank you.
You can put that in a bumper or something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll do it as Nick.
David Hayter says.
I should listen to this damn podcast.
That's perfect.
What I'm doing in the first film is I'm a first-time screenwriter. Yeah, so I'm trying not to get fired, and I've never written a movie before that was going to get made. I'm trying to copy the voice of the last draft, which was done by my friend Chris McQuarrie, who is a certifiable genius. And his dialogue is, he does great tough guy dialogue, but it's very elevated and smart, and it's like superhero movies written by Ernest Hemingway, basically. So I'm trying to match that in this sort of somewhat grand, eloquent tone. When the movie hit, and then suddenly I was hired, like the studio said, okay, we're going to hire you to write the sequel. I was like, oh, I can write my own voice now. Like I can write, or I can make it more Claremont than McCoy.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So a little quippier, a little dirtier, a little harder edged. Well, not necessarily harder, just different voices. But it was more. I was more allowed to use my voice, and I felt freer to use my voice than the first time around, where I felt compelled to just make it all sound like Chris. You know?
Right.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then, so you were a big fan of the comics, and when the first movie came out, it had a pretty big effect on the X-Men comics in general. I mean, the costumes in the comics changed to match those of the movies, but they launched the Ultimate comics line with Mark Miller writing those, and then they even used his last issue on that run used the Magneto and Xavier playing chess at the end, and writers like Grant Morrison seem to be focused on bringing the X-Men into this new millennium. What's it like then, being a fan of the comics, to be working on a movie based on the comic and then seeing the comics be influenced by the movie you worked on?
Well, that's insane. I mean, first of all, when I was 15 years old and I would be buying the X-Men every month, it used to say soon to be a major motion picture. Yeah. And I'd say to myself, boy, I hope they don't mess that up. Whoever's responsibility it is. And then suddenly it was my responsibility, and along with the rest of the cast and filmmakers.
Right.
And that was a huge amount of pressure. And the early incipient internet trolls were like, you can't change the costumes, and Wolverine's got to be in the yellow and blue and blah, blah, blah. And Brian said, the costumes make no sense to me. He goes, unless they're utilitarian, unless they serve some purpose, if they protect them, if they don't serve any purpose, I don't know. He was like, why? Wolverine is the toughest one of them. Why is he the only one that wears a mask? It's nonsense.
Interesting point.
Yeah, and this is just, he wasn't a fan of the comic. He didn't know X-Men really. He watched the cartoon show.
Right.
That was it. I don't think he's ever read an X-Men comic. But that's a filmmaker's assessment. It's like, well, why are you wearing a mask and yellow spandex?
Yeah.
When you could be wearing leather for fighting, So everybody complained about it online, and then when it came out, the comics immediately started using the black leather outfits, and yeah, we had a big impact. I'm ashamed to say I didn't read. I was sort of so inundated with X-Men at that point.
Right, sure.
And I wasn't reading the comics as religiously as I did when I was a kid, because I went through a period where I couldn't afford it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And plus, then when we did the first X-Men, they gave me an expense account at the Silver Snail comic book shop in Toronto, which is a great shop. Yeah, so I just buy stacks and stacks of X-Men, all sorts of other comics, did all this research, and then, just took a break to rest my
Yeah.
So I don't really know the extent to which we influence the comics, but I do. I love Grant Morrison and Mark Millar, and the idea that they were motivated to take what we did and run with it is very, very flattering to me. Very, very, very cool.
First X-Men movie happens. You sort of trip into that. X2, you're finding your own voice. Then we hit X3, and they go in a completely different direction. I'm interested to know, if you had kept going with the series, where would you have wanted to take it?
I'm going to look up right now, see if I have my, see if I can find my X-Men 3 notes. I won't be reading them out.
Was it the same thing, though, with X-Men 1, where you were being said, like, don't think of another movie, just do this one? Or were you also just like, no, we're doing another one after this too?
Well, at that point, we knew the movies were going to be guaranteed hits. So yeah, we started. So Brian and I, when we were breaking X-Men 2, we were thinking about X-Men 3, and I mean, obviously, where it was heading was Dark Phoenix, but it would have been a lot closer to the books than what occurred. And look, the problem, the reason we didn't do X3 was because they were forcing Brian to do the third X-Men movie, and he said, well, look, I just did 6 years of X-Men, can I do something else for you? Want Logan's Run? Can I do Logan's Run first and then X-Men 3? And they're like, no, we have to have this out. We've already picked the date.
Right.
I don't want to get too far into it because it's not my business. But they weren't willing to. Fox wasn't willing to pay Brian to keep him on hold from other things he wanted to do. And then Warner's called him and said, "Do you want to do Superman?" And they just offered him a truckload of money that Fox wasn't putting up, but they were telling him he couldn't direct things or whatever. And it was just really, it wasn't handled very well by the Fox folks. And so they fired Brian as soon as he accepted Superman Returns, and we were all, out of work. And then what happened was they were like, we have this release date. So they got Brett Ratner. They threw together a script, but the script wasn't ready to go. And it was a whole new team that didn't really know, the ins and outs of X-Men.
Right.
And so it was kind of doomed to go in a very different direction from the beginning. And it's a real shame. So Brian and I, it was about, our X-Men 3 was about Jean Grey upping the ante of the war, getting all the power in the world and saying, essentially, Magneto's right. I'll solve this war. I'll solve it right now. And she flies off to Washington to face off the entire American military, and it's up to the X-Men to stop her. And it was really, for me, the whole movie was building to the moment in the books where, because throughout the film, Wolverine would have been saying, you guys don't understand. We have to kill her. She has to die. Like the power like that she's gone. Like the Jean we knew is gone, and it's his hard-edged, I'm a killer kind of thing coming up, and everybody's fighting against that. And then there's a moment in the books that Claremont wrote where he gets on top of her, he tackles her to the ground, he's got his claws to her throat, he can do it. And she gets control of herself for a moment, and she's like, do it. You have to kill me. I don't know how long I can control myself. Do it. And he can't.
Right.
Because he loves her. And he falters, and then her power comes back and takes over, and she just blows him away. And I was like, that's the whole reason for doing the film. And they did something along those lines, but it wasn't. Well, and like I say, I don't want to bash Brett or the writers or anybody. They were put in a very difficult position. But what I really missed about it was Phoenix. The Phoenix power is the ultimate expression of female power, and the ultimate ability for a woman in this world to suddenly turn all the tables that have ever been set against her to her own will. And it's just so empowering, and it's so, it's so much wish fulfillment and so much freedom, and it's the sort of thing that I'd love for my daughter to see.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, you're powerful. You're so powerful that it can be dangerous. It can be frightening to people, but you can make this world what you want it to be. That was the message I want to put forward.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the way it went, they kind of made her a zombie who was under the control of Magneto, of another man. And I was like, that. Yeah, and I'm like, that's so sad to me, because the other great thing, and I'm sorry I'm blathering, but it's a podcast about X-Men.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Blather away.
I'm uniquely suited. But the other thing I always loved about X-Men, like Star Trek, is, they had black characters, they had international characters, they had, Russian characters, and the women were as respectable, as powerful, as as richly detailed as the men.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always been part of it for me. It's like, if you're making a movie about bigotry, then your core team should be, completely representative and done with respect. And that got lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because of the rush, unfortunately.
I mean, it pretty much looks like the Fox era of the X-Men films are over after about 13 movies. Are there moments? I mean, you talked about them with X-Men 3, but are there other? Had the series kept going on after that, like it had? Are there characters or stories you would have liked to have seen in that universe that you guys had helped create? In 2000, is there something that you're maybe most proud of in this series? I mean, it's a long-running series. It's made billions of dollars. It's been to a lot of people what the X-Men are for the course of almost 20 years now.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud of that. I'm so thrilled for everybody that we worked with to get these movies out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy that the world, a much larger portion of the world gets to understand the beauty of what Stan Lee created. I'm so gratified that it caught up. And I was very proud of. I'm more proud of like individual moments.
Right.
That I know I can't, like the moment where Wolverine pulls his claws out for the first time on that guy in the bar, and then I was sitting where Wolverine was sitting at the bar, and I said, "Hey, why don't we do this?" Like the guy comes up behind him, he pulls a knife, Rogue cries out, he turns around, he puts the guy against the wall, and we see the claws come out. And Brian was like, "Oh yeah, we'll put the camera like the claws will come right into camera." And I was like, yeah, but then he's holding him, and then a shotgun comes in the other side of the camera, and the bartender's like, "Get out of my bar, freak!" And you think it's over, and he just turns around and he cuts the thing and cuts the shotgun in half. And then I said to Brian, "You can get this wide shot of him with his claws out on both sides, and that'll be your iconic Wolverine pose." And I did the pose, and then they just did what I did.
That's awesome.
So that was pretty. So that bar in Toronto is now a stationery shop where they sell funny gift cards, things like that.
All right, yeah.
So sometimes I just go in there and I just stand like that.
Yeah.
Just do the X-Men.
The universe is pretty ironic with that stuff.
Yeah, people don't know what I'm doing.
That scene it's like one of the most auspicious entries of a character, and I remember watching it with somebody who hadn't seen the movie in theater, so I was showing it to them first time. Wolverine, like you said, he pops out those claws for the first time at that bar, and my friend there was just like hooked and glued to the screen. It just grabs all your attention in that moment.
Oh yeah, well, thank you. I tend to agree, and obviously, Brian shot the hell out of it, and Hugh was amazing, and Anna was amazing, and it's a group effort. But it reminds me, I went to see the movie for the first time with an audience in Toronto, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine who had seen a preview, and he really loved the movie. And so we're sitting there, and they are dead silent for the first 15 minutes of the movie. Nobody's saying anything. And I whispered to my friend John, I was like, "Are they bored? Like, what's happening?" And he goes, "Dude, they're not bored." And I thought he was just being generous, And then Wolverine went through the windshield of the SU or his trailer and slides across the thing. He crashes to the road, slides 15 feet, and just comes to a stop.
Right.
And there's silence, and the audience just went bananas. All of that tension, everything they've been feeling just came up, and they just exploded. And I was like, oh, I think this is going to work out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was opening day, and it was pretty cool.
That's so cool. Okay, well, beyond just X-Men, superheroes are their own genre now. They make billions of dollars every year, and you were on the ground floor of all of that with the whole team. What does that mean to you? Like, when you really think about that?
I don't know what it means to me. I mean, it means, that I own a couple of houses and I got a nice car and my daughter goes to this crazy expensive private school. Mm-hmm. It meant that I actually had a career. It means that I can get in to pitch movies to the heads of studios, and I've got access to the inner working. I mean, it broke me into Hollywood. Mm-hmm. So those are the practical things that it means. I get a lot of nerd love, which is great.
Too much?
No, never. It's especially for X-Men. It's just nice to make something, work hard on something that makes people happy.
Right.
And it's just, there's like really no downside. People are like, oh my God, I brought my dad and he loved it. And, or, somebody in a wheelchair will be like, oh my God, I love this. And it really meant something to me. And no, it's unlike everything else in the world, it's almost universally good to have been in this position. In terms of legacy, I don't really read a lot into that. I mean, I'm glad as a fan that they're making Avengers movies. I'm glad as a fan that you're making, some great Spider-Man movies, things like that. But unless I'm directly involved with the movie, it doesn't really affect my sense of self. Like, I don't walk around saying I invented this.
Sure.
Because I didn't. I just, I was literally in the right place at the right time. I fell ass backwards into this. So there's no grand legacy. I don't think, but it changed my life in so many ways. And the fact that it was changed through something I loved so much myself as a kid is very satisfying. Is very cool. But again, it's like Watchmen. I'm glad we got that movie made. I worked for 9 years on it. I mean, I put my heart and soul into it. But it's Alan Moore's work.
Right.
I'm just translating. And there was a little more. Like, I wasn't directly copying Chris Claremont's scripts, but I'm really translating his work. I feel like I'm more of an adapter than an original screenwriter in those cases, anyways.
Well, as a fan, I know they're talking about bringing the X-Men into the MCU, and we've talked a little bit about the message of the X-Men and what they really bring to social issues. What about those kinds of things do you hope that they'll bring into this giant world of the MCU?
What do I hope they'll bring? God, I don't know. I hope they bring in me as a screenwriter.
Okay, we'll check that.
Well, look, I've known Kevin Feige since we did the first X-Men.
Right. And
part of the reason they are so successful at Marvel is because Kevin is a genuine fan who really knows the material in a way that studio executives don't. I know that they will stay true to the ethos of it, to the nature of, the themes of bigotry and injustice. I think it'll be very true to the X-Men, but it'll be through a new lens of different filmmakers and different actors. And, it's always weird when you have to sort of recast everybody and take it from there. So I'm not terribly concerned. I think it'll feel a little more Marvel than Fox, for example. But I can't, I really don't. I hope they do it well is really my only desire, because I know they're smart enough to know what the value of X-Men is and how it should work.
Right.
After that, it's really just up to the alchemy of the filmmakers they put together, and hopefully it works great.
What are you working on at this moment then? What should we be looking forward to from you as well?
So I made a big transition into TV. I mean, I'm working on a film right now, but I can't talk about that.
Okay.
But I've successfully I'm executive producing a series at Netflix called Warrior Nun that comes out. Oh, maybe I'm not supposed to talk about it.
Okay.
Well, anyway, no, people know that it's done. I mean, it's coming out in a few months on Netflix, season 1, and so I'm working on that show. What else? I have a pilot deal. I sold a pilot idea to CBS network, and they are deciding if it will be a show as we speak.
Oh.
Cool.
I have an animated show that we're apparently getting an offer on that I will executive produce and be one of the leads in, which would be very
cool.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do that because I've got my foot in voiceover and screenwriting productions.
Yeah.
Right.
It'd be nice to sort of mix those things. So it's pretty busy right now, which is nice.
Well, thank you for coming on our show. Like I said at the beginning, the first X-Men movie is a favorite of both mine and Hilary's, and I'm an X-Men fan because of the first movie coming out and it introducing me to X-Men, which then introduced me to the comics. I picked up Chris Claremont's Giant Size, or not, he didn't write Giant Size. I picked up Chris Claremont's X-Men after seeing the movie, and I just fell into it ever since. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's what I love. And when we were making the film, before we started shooting, I said to Tom Rothman, who was the head of the president of Fox, I was like, Tom, there's 50 X-Men comic book titles out there. Like, there's so many fans. Like, shouldn't we be confident that there's going to be enough X-Men fans to support the film? And he said, David, the number of X-Men comic book fans that are going to see this movie will be done by 10 o'clock Friday night. And we have to get everyone else. And that really put it in perspective for me. And I was like, more people need to know what X-Men is. And so the fact that you say that, Eric, is very cool.
Yeah.
That makes me very happy.
That's your legacy. You helped Eric become a fan.
And if it helped make you less of a bigot, I'm thrilled.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sure you're a lovely, very.
He's okay. He's all right.
Very woke AF.
Woke AF. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really nice talking to you.
Well, it's so nice talking to you, Hilary, and Eric. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and let me know if I can ever answer anything else for you.
Sure,
right,
will do.
So
Thank
much.
you. That was an interview with David Hayter.
We just did it just now.
Listen, I'm gonna go back in time to like the year 2001, and I'm gonna tell myself, hey, guess what? You're interviewing David Hayter. And
this is not a good use of that power.
I won't believe it. I have to. He won't believe it. He'll call me a liar.
Will you also do something else that's like beneficial to society? You're just gonna talk to your past self.
I don't know. What else can I do in 2002? Just tell everybody that Spider-Man's gonna be a big hit?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will.
But not to cling to it too dearly.
That's right. Yeah. Enjoy Spider-Man while you have it.
You know what? That would be a valuable use of your time traveling ability.
Yeah. Where am I gonna tell people this though in 2002? The forums? AOL chat rooms?
All text-based.
When we recorded the interview, you told me not to put my heart on my sleeve, but I did anyway.
I did.
I did at the end.
Well, honestly, I'll tell you what, it was a lot less than I thought you were going to
do. we told him that for both of us, the first X-Men movie was a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, really was.
I don't know. It's always kind of like a 2000 when I turned 14 in the first X-Men movie. It's almost kind of like a flag in the sand for like two different halves of my life. There's the pre X-Men movie, and then there's post X-Men movie.
For some, it's the assassination of John F. Kennedy. For you, it's the first X-Men movie.
Thanks again to David Hayter for doing that interview. That was I thought that was so cool. I'm excited that everybody got to listen to that. He is still, after the first X-Men movie is now this summer. It's 20 years old, and I think David Hayter kind of showed that he still has the same enthusiasm that he did.
That's true.
Back then.
He still had the energy up about it.
Yeah, he still seemed to be excited to talk about the X-Men.
Didn't call us a bunch of nerds.
No, he didn't. Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, could have.
Yeah, could have. Yeah. Isn't it crazy to think that movie is 20 years old this summer?
I wish it was older.
Really?
Tell you what.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You wish we were celebrating.
I wish it and I were older.
Well, we can talk about how old we are this summer when it turns 20. Join us next episode when we're going to talk about the Days of Future Past movie.
Yeah, it'll be a nice bookend.
Yeah, Days of Future Past. And then after that, we're talking the Days of Future Past episodes of the 90s cartoon, which we did not plan, but it just delightfully fell that way.
Yeah, it did. Why do you tell them that we didn't plan it that way?
I don't know. I want to be honest.
Take the credit.
I want people to understand that we're being honest. I want it all out there. I want
people you know what? We're an open podcast. We don't lie to our listeners.
Yeah. I am Dusk vs. Tweak everywhere online. And apart from other shows on the Radio Meanwhile Network, I'm the co-host of the podcast, The All the Book Show. Hilary?
And I'm Hilary Gunning.
Yeah. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. Again, you can find more about this show and others like it at the network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on S. Oh my gosh. S on Previously on what? X. Previously on S, I guess.
Hang on. Mm-hmm. Do you think that S is as cool a letter as X?
No.
Do you think that?
Previously on S would be our Spider-Man podcast. So, did the Spider-Man cartoon have a Previously on?
I don't know. I don't know if it was episodic. We'll have to ask my husband.
Was Venom like, Previously on Spider-Man?
I think that we could say that it was, and people would believe us.
Right. Previously on X is where you find us on Twitter and Facebook. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks for listening.